All right. Well, we'll start from the beginning. Of course, the story of how the band was discovered playing on the street outside a Pretenders concert is well known, but do you think it's a story that's been a bit overplayed over the years? I mean, surely, regardless of what happened that night, the band's career still would have panned out the way it did.
Well, it didn't. Being discovered playing out on the street by Chrissy Hynde and then being invited to open up for the Pretenders gave us a lot of confidence, because we were not able to even get a gig at the most pathetic rock clubs in Milwaukee because they didn't even think that we were a rock band. So to have one of the hippest bands in the world acknowledge us just gave us a lot of confidence. So I would say that it was crucial psychologically, even though it's not like they got us a recording contract or took us on their entire tour. So it was still fun.
Oh,
a lot
absolutely.
of fun.
Was the experience that you guys had doing busking, as you did a bit of in those days, do you think in hindsight it helped develop the band's stage presence when it came to actually performing on stage? Were the skills you learned in those busking years that you adapted?
Busking is absolutely essential if you want to be a good musician. Although now, I mean, you're in Melbourne, so you have the most horrible busking scene in the world there, with all these people with their portable PAs, and they're not really busking. So, but in the days when acoustic busking was the norm, it developed our skills a lot. It developed our dynamics, our ability to project our voices, for me to be able to get a very distinctive sound out of the bass, playing acoustically. All that was, busking was essential for that. Unfortunately, people they've changed busking into some other kind of performance mode, which I don't really acknowledge.
Mm. Do you remember the first time you met Gordon and the first impressions that you had of him and his music, his songs?
There was a theater in Milwaukee called the Metropole Theater, and the owner of that establishment told me, "Hey, you should come check out this Gordon Gano kid. He's a pint-sized Lou Reed imitator. You'll like him." Because he knew how much I loved Lou Reed. So Gordon was playing, I think he was playing with his brother, and I checked him out. In fact, I did really like him, and I liked his style. He was reminiscent of Lou Reed at that time, but he had his own songs which were quite good. Some of them were recorded with the Femmes. So it made a pretty good impression, but it also made an impression of this guy needs a lot of help, because he was undeveloped. He was very young, I think 18 when I met him. And we started getting together and just working on stuff, and eventually we started performing live together.
So for you personally, what attracted you to the acoustic bass in preference to, say, a stand-up bass?
Well, I didn't drive. I didn't have a car, so I wanted something that I could take on the bus and walk around with, and that's not a double bass. So I first made my own acoustic bass guitar out of a guitar. I just modified it. And then I got this Ernie Ball Earthwood acoustic bass, which I'm still using 35 years later, the same model. I have about 7 of them now. And it was a funny story, because I went to a music store to put the down payment on the bass. And the guys at the store knew me, and they knew that I was broke and homeless. So they said, if you don't come up with the rest of the money by the time they deliver the bass, you have to forfeit this down payment. And I said, "Oh yeah, that's okay. I'll figure it out." But I really didn't know what I was going to do. And I walked out of the music store, and I walked about 10 meters, and there was a wad of money rolling on the sidewalk, and I picked it up. It was $125, and I don't know where this came from. And I just walked right back into the store and said, "Here's my next payment."
Oh, your lucky day.
It seemed like a good omen.
Your style of playing is pretty full on. There's a real aggression to it. Is that the type of playing that appeals to you as a listener as well?
I listen mostly to, I mean, even back then and even more so now, I listen to a lot of pretty aggressive jazz music, improvised music where people are really, pushing it. And I guess that was a big influence on me also. We came out of the punk rock era. By the time we started the Femmes, punk had started to become standardized, so we didn't want to imitate the other punk bands. Hardcore punk was starting to happen at that point, but we considered them like fundamentalists. They're very puritanical about the way they approached it and very dogmatic. So even though a lot of people wouldn't consider the Femmes to be punk, we consider it to be punk, and that's because of the energy that we put into the music.
It's hard to believe it's been 34 years now since that first record, and what a great debut it was. Do you recall having a good feeling about it at the time, that you'd got yourself something really special there to begin with?
At the time we recorded the first album, we knew that it was a masterpiece.
Yeah.
We planned it to be that, and if you listen to the production qualities, we intentionally stripped it of anything that would signify the time period that it was recorded in, because we thought it was going to have lasting value. But I'd say that we probably didn't expect it to be as popular as it became. We thought it would be a cult favorite. It is a cult favorite, but cults in rock music have gotten bigger now than they were then.
It wasn't an instant success, though, was it? It was a bit of a sleeper, and it was pretty much a lot of word of mouth about the band that got it going eventually, wasn't it?
Well, it was an instant success in the sense that there were probably about 10 people in every city in the Western world who gravitated towards it right away. And then they spread the word. So we did not rely upon radio or the record company. There was a lot of college radio playing for us in the States that helped us get established with the young demographic, but we got very little commercial radio play.
You've released some fantastic albums since that debut. Has it been a little frustrating over the years if the audience focus is constantly going back to that first album?
It's a little frustrating. I think it's more frustrating for Gordon than it is for me, because Gordon has written a lot of good songs, and he probably thinks that there should be another one there that would have eclipsed Blister in the Sun, for example. And we've had some songs that were successful in the interim, and when we play a live show and we do songs from the entire spectrum of our recording career side by side, they're all accepted. It's just that there's one album, the first one, which it just has more support behind it. So it's a little frustrating, but on the other hand, it's good that we have that album, because it has led so many people to the band as a live show.
Sure.
And to the other records as well.
What about for you personally? Is there an album within the band's catalogue where you felt it really came of age and became the band you wanted it to be?
Well, for a long time, we all thought Hallowed Ground was the really interesting album. And in fact, we still play, the majority of our set is still drawn from the first album in Hallowed Ground, and a smattering of songs from the other albums. But now that we've started recording again after a long hiatus, we put out the Happy New Year EP and also We Can Do Anything album, we're really fond of those records because we feel like it's a return to form, and that that we still have it, and we still have what it was that made us notable in the first place. So I know it's corny and it's a cliche for people to say that they like the most recent one, but I think it has actually accomplished a lot of things that we were missing on with some of the other albums.
Yeah. Even though your core sound has always been there, the band's never been afraid to add a splash of something different using a wide range of instruments here and there on your albums. Do those moments generally come to mind during the recording process, or are they more pre-planned than that?
Well, we're a very spontaneous band, and one of the things we have in the band is a sideman called the Horns of Dilemma, which it happens in the studio and live. It can happen because we meet people. Like if we were in Soweto and we met some drummers who were playing there on the street, and we invited them down to the show, and they played with us. This happens. Sometimes we invite people into the studio. So there's a plan that we're always willing to collaborate with other people, but there's very little advanced planning in place.
Now, while you and Gordon have been the constants in the band through the years, you have had changes of drummers. Looking at the drummers that you've had, has there been a uniform quality that they've all had?
Well, they have to be willing to listen to the songs and play the songs, not the drums. And the more they meet that ideal, the better they are for the band. We've got a new live album that we're working on right now that we're assembling. It's not released yet, and the drummer John Sparrow plays nothing but a Weber barbecue grill with brushes.
Oh, really?
So yeah, we've gone even more minimal now, and we it's not recorded live in concert. It's recorded live in other kinds of settings, totally acoustic, no amplification whatsoever, and just with 2 microphones.
Oh, wonderful!
So it's getting more stripped down and stripped down. They also have to be able to use brushes, and they have to have the element of swing, which has been lost from rock music. It was there in the beginning. Like if you listen to a classic example would be Bebop-A-Lula by Gene Vincent and the Blue Caps. The song has brushes, swing. It's got that kind of groove to it, and a lot of the early rock and roll bands had musicians who were either coming out of blues or jazz or country. And the Motown artists, I mean, the musicians, they all came out of jazz. So swing was a really important element in rock and roll. And in fact, like if you look at the Rolling Stones and the Kinks, the Who, they all had drummers who came out of jazz. And the Femmes still have that quality of swing, which I think most other bands don't really even think about anymore, because their main influences come from a slightly previous generation of rock musicians.
Mm-hmm. How would you describe your working relationship with Gordon through the years? I know you hit a bump in the road a few years ago, but overall, how's it been?
Well, we've always had a bad relationship. It's been very consistent. But on the other hand, you know, we understand each other, and it's our personalities are very different, and you know, Gordon needs somebody like me around, otherwise he's not going to actually do anything. And if it's not me, it's got to be somebody else, but he hasn't found anybody else. So I'd say he's lucky to have me. But the thing is, musically, we always hit it off from the beginning, and and we can instantly start playing the stuff. That's the reason why, even if we've had a handful of changes in the drummer position, it still sounds like the Femmes. Whereas if we go off and do something without each other, it's not. It's clearly something different.
Has having other musical endeavours outside of the Femmes been helpful for the longevity of the band? Has it kept things fresh for you when you get back together?
Well, we all have... Everybody in the Femmes, Gordon, myself, and like John Sparrow, our current drummer, and all the previous drummers, and anybody else associated with the band, have always considered themselves musicians, like not rock stars or not Violent Femmes, or it's not that restricted. So naturally, we play a lot of different kinds of music. I play Japanese classical music. The next gig I have coming up is with the Australian Chamber Orchestra, playing at the Barbican in London. Gordon does like gospel music on the side, and he does other film soundtracks and so forth. It's very important for us to be creative outside the band, and that helps us to be more focused on what the band is doing. I've found that in earlier years, when my focus is entirely upon the Femmes, I try to put a lot of ideas into that band. Some of them were not really such appropriate ideas for Violent Femmes to do. So in a way, having other outlets is good, because it makes you just say, okay, what is our real task together as Violent Femmes? What can we make that's really suits our skill set mutually, and then do that.
Tell us about your other instrument of choice, the shakuhachi, the Japanese bamboo flute, and how you discovered it and got into it.
I had moved from Milwaukee to New York City, and New York Times had an article that said there's a flute convention at Times Square. So I went to it just out of curiosity, and I was playing a lot of the different flutes they had from around the world, and one of them was the shakuhachi. I had already read about the shakuhachi because it's associated with Buddhism, which I was practicing. I was doing sitting meditation and studying the philosophy. So I knew about the instrument background and just started tuning on it. And someone gave me a business card. Hey, if you want to learn how to play that thing, give me a call. And of course, I'm a multi-instrumentalist. I can play any instrument the first time I look at it, except shakuhachi was a little bit tricky. And I thought, yeah, well, I'll just take a few lessons until I get the basics, and then I'll teach myself. But I quickly found that that's not the way it works. A completely different notation system. The music is very elusive, so I started intense study of it, and gradually became a licensed teacher of shakuhachi, because we have a system kind of like the black belt system in karate, where you go through different stages.
Oh yeah.
And I guess that's a quality control thing that the Japanese have built into the pedagogy.
Now, as you mentioned, the band released its first album of new material for a long time last year. That must have been a great feeling, getting back and recording again.
Well, it was a feeling of trepidation, because although our live shows have always been good, they've ranged from being good to extremely good or great or whatever you want to say, but we never really were known for doing bad shows. In the studio, it's kind of hit or miss, because you have maybe an unsympathetic producer there, or there's a record company that doesn't get it, or you make a good record but people don't think it's good, or there's all kinds of pitfalls built into it. So in a sense, it would have served our purposes to just continue playing as a live band, but we decided to give a shot to recording. We did it very spontaneously. Like the EP was recorded in just one day, and the album was recorded in about, I guess, 3 or 4 days. So even though it's a lot of output for us after a long hiatus, it wasn't really a lot of work, and the results were really good and spontaneous and sounded like the Femmes. So only upon releasing these recordings, I think, that Gordon and I realized, what a relief it was to do that. It was, maybe we didn't realize how much being creative again in that sense would improve the way we felt about the band.
Was there a different feel in the studio this time compared to in the past? Did you notice a difference in Gordon's approach to recording, or was it pretty much as it was?
Well, we've tried all different kinds of recording methods, but lately we've been focusing on keeping it live. One of the things that I insisted upon, because I've spent a lot of time thinking about recording and also actually recording, and there are these words that are used by recording engineers like separation, isolation, like they put you in an isolation booth. Now, why on earth would anybody feel good about being put in an isolation booth? It's like recording has gotten so far away from the roots. We call ourselves American music, and the roots of American music are blues and country, jazz, folk music, and these things were all recorded live and with people in a room playing together. And somehow along the way, we got ideas of isolation, separation, and naturally the recordings reflect that feeling. That's the reason why these recordings sound like a bunch of disembodied voices, floating around in the ether and not even colliding with each other, but just being alienated. That's the way I hear a lot of the recordings that people are making. So I said, let's just all get in a room together and play and not worry about the isolation and the separation and all that. So I prefer that method, at least for this kind of band. There are some times when you might want to use the studio itself as a recording instrument. But still, a lot of the best music is made just by people getting together in a room and playing.
Absolutely. The whole recording industry has changed so much since you first began, and not just the way it's recorded, but the way the music's distributed. I guess releasing an album is a totally different type of event that it once was.
Well, yeah, the main difference is that in the past you may have hoped or had an expectation that you were going to sell a lot of records. And nowadays, that's just not going to happen unless the only recordings that actually sell, well, I don't think any of them are really. Maybe once or twice a year, somebody like Sia or, I don't even know who the other artists are like that, but they sell a large quantity of records. But most people are just releasing records as an excuse to go out on tour and have something to play for the people or get airplay to generate interest in their live show. So it's actually liberating because we no longer have to think in terms of crafting some sort of incredible masterpiece that's going to get airplay, as if spending a lot of time on a recording is going to make it better and more likely to get airplay anyway, which it's highly questionable. And that's the reason why people listen to a lot of oldies stations, because there's a lot of spirit in the music of the past that people are now actually starting to get back into, because we don't have time to. There aren't even recording studios anymore. in New York City, there are only a handful of recording studios that have state-of-the-art facilities. Most people are recording in their rooms. I mean, like Gautier, he recorded his stuff in his bedroom.
Yeah. Since you've been performing live again, have you noticed a new generation of people coming through to your shows, or is it primarily made up of those college kids from the 80s that followed you back in the day?
Well, I think we're fortunate to have probably one of the widest demographics in rock music. We've got kids, I mean, literally kids like 8 years old, 10 years old coming to the shows. A lot of teenagers, and then we've got people all the way up into the I guess probably pans out around in the 60s or so. It's a good crowd.
Your band's had a wonderful connection with Australian audiences through the years. You're as loved here as you are anywhere in the world. What do you think it is about the Australian audiences that clicked with the band pretty much from the beginning?
Well, we were one of the first bands to make the trek to Australia, and that was thanks to Ken West and Vivian Lees, who somehow had the foresight to think that we would work in Australia. So they brought us here in 1984, and we've been coming ever since then, and it's only really solidified our place in the pantheon of musical artists in Australia, to the point where we're practically considered like Australians, although I guess that makes sense now that
you are.
Live here.
Yeah.
And I'm a citizen. But, like last year we played A Day on the Green with Hoodoo Gurus and Sunny Boys, and we were the only American band on the bill, and yet nobody questioned that.
Yeah.
It seemed appropriate.
Well, we love having you here as a fully fledged Aussie yourself. Now, what inspired the move to Australia, and in particular Tasmania?
I always liked Australia since the first time we came here, and furthermore, my first impression of Australia was this is a country on its way up, and the United States is on its way down. And I guess if you look at the way things have gone, that was a good assessment that I made at that time. Just wanted to move to Australia and made it happen like about 10 years ago, because it seemed like the land of opportunity, and in fact that's what has played out for me in this country. People have given me a lot of support and a lot of freedom to do whatever kind of music comes to mind, and all kinds of different activities. So I love Australia, and I'm glad that the people have, I guess they think I have something to offer them as well.
I sure do. We're looking forward to the upcoming tour. What's on your books for the rest of 2017?
Well, we're touring here, and then we'll be doing some more recording and also touring in the States. So Femmes will have more activities, and I'm still working on all my stuff here at Mona and putting together the next Mona Foma Festival.
Fantastic. Plenty to keep you busy. Hey, Brian, thanks so much for taking the time to have a chat. We're really looking forward to the tour. I missed you last time you came around, so I'm really looking forward to the upcoming shows.
We'll see you at the gig.
No worries. I'll be there front and center. Good on you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Cheers.
Brian. Cheers.
Bye.